There is a story that has remained hidden for almost 2,000 years, buried under layers of silence and carefully constructed narratives. It is the final chapter of a woman who walked alongside the greatest spiritual leader in history, who witnessed the most crucial moments of the Christian faith, but whose legacy was deliberately torn out of the book. Have you ever wondered why we know so little about the final destiny of Mary Magdalene? She was the apostle to the apostles, the first witness of the resurrection, yet after delivering her message, she simply vanishes from the official record. What happened to her after the ascension? And more importantly, why was her death, her final legacy, treated with such absolute silence by the Church for centuries? This void is not an accident. The silence is a deliberate cover-up. The erasure of her final chapter was the final step in one of history's most successful character assassinations. The Church could not remove the most important woman in the Bible, so they buried her true identity and then ignored her powerful, alternative ending. Prepare yourself. We are about to travel from first-century Jerusalem to the shores of France to piece together the tragic, silent end of Mary Magdalene, a secret the world was never meant to hear. If you feel this calling to uncover what was hidden, comment with the words, "It's time to remember." Like this video and subscribe to join the mission. Before we travel to her final resting place, we must first travel back in time to meet the real Mary of Magdalene, a woman described not in later legends, but within the pages of the Gospels themselves. The first and perhaps most overlooked clue to her identity is her name, Magdalene. This was not a surname. It was a title meaning Mary of Magdala, and the Magdala of the first century was not some sleepy, rustic village. Recent archaeological excavations have unearthed a thriving, sophisticated city. It was a major center for the fishing and boat-building industries, a bustling port on the main trade route between Damascus and Egypt. Archaeologists there have uncovered luxurious villas with mosaic floors, elaborate marketplaces, and most importantly, a stunning first-century synagogue, one of the oldest ever discovered in Galilee. This historical context tells us that a woman from Magdala, with her own resources, was likely educated, connected, and of a significant social standing. This historical context gives new weight to the stunning detail in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8. It lists Mary Magdalene first among a group of prominent women, including Joanna, the wife of Herod's household manager, who supported Jesus' entire ministry out of their own resources. Let's be clear what this means. They weren't just followers, they were patrons. In the Greco-Roman world, patronage was a formal social contract. For a group of women to be the named patrons of a male rabbi's traveling ministry was a radical and unprecedented reversal of the social order, and Mary Magdalene was listed as the leader among them. She was not a fringe character, she was a foundational pillar of the entire Christian movement. The second part of her identity comes from that same verse. She was a woman from whom 7 demons had been cast out. For centuries, this single phrase has been misinterpreted and weaponized to imply a life of deep moral corruption and sexual sin. But this is a modern Freudian bias projected onto an ancient text. In the first century Jewish worldview, ailments that had no visible cause, from severe epilepsy to what we might now call bipolar disorder, PTSD, or crippling clinical depression, were often understood as the work of malign spirits or demons. The number 7 in Jewish tradition symbolizes totality, completion, perfection. So to be afflicted with 7 demons did not mean she was 7 times more sinful than anyone else. It meant she was in a state of complete and total suffering, utterly broken by an affliction that dominated every aspect of her life. Her healing, therefore, was not a moral pardon. It was a medical liberation, an act of profound restoration that brought her from the depths of suffering back into the light of life. It is from this place of immense gratitude that her unbreakable lifelong devotion was forged. And that devotion forged in liberation and immense gratitude placed her at the very center of history. All 4 Gospels, in a remarkable display of historical unity, record her presence at the crucifixion. Think of that scene. At the moment of Jesus' greatest agony and abandonment, when the male disciples had sworn to die for him, but instead scattered in terror when Peter, the rock, was in the courtyard, denying he even knew the man, Mary Magdalene stood firm. She did not flee. She stood at the foot of that bloody cross and bore witness to his final, agonizing breaths. She witnessed his death. She followed his body to the tomb. And on the third day, as the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all attest, she was the first to return at dawn to perform the sacred burial retrace duty of love, typically reserved for the closest female family members. And it was there, alone in the morning light according to John's Gospel, that she became the first human being to witness the single most important event in Christianity. He speaks her name, and in that moment, history is changed. He then gives her a specific command, a formal commission. Go to my brothers and tell them. This is not a casual instruction. In the ancient world, an apostle was, by definition, one who is sent with a message. In this moment, Jesus makes Mary Magdalene the first true apostle of the New Covenant. The first sermon of the resurrection was not given by Peter or John. It was given by a woman. It is for this reason that the earliest and most respected church fathers, like Hippolytus of Rome and St. Augustine, gave her a title of immense power, a title that has been tragically forgotten by the Western Church. Apostola Apostolorum, the apostle to the apostles, a wealthy patron, a liberated disciple, a courageous witness, the first apostle of the resurrection. This is the woman the Bible shows us, a figure of unassailable authority, commissioned directly by the resurrected Christ. So where did the image we all know today, the weak, repentant prostitute, come from? That fabricated image was the primary weapon used to erase her final, inconvenient legacy. To understand the Church's motive for silencing her death, we must first examine how they distorted her life. The woman described in the Bible was a wealthy patron, a courageous witness, and the first apostle of the resurrection. So, why was this powerful figure transformed into the image we all know today, the weak, repentant prostitute? The lie has a specific author, a time, and a place. The year is 591 AD. The Roman Empire in the West has collapsed. Europe is ravaged by plague, war, and political chaos. The Church is the only remaining institution of order. Its leader, Pope Gregory the Great, is a powerful and brilliant administrator whose primary goal is to unify and simplify Christian doctrine to bring order to a fractured world. In this context, he delivers a series of sermons on the Gospels. In his now infamous Sermon 33, he performs an act of theological alchemy. With no prior scriptural or traditional basis, he takes 3 separate women from the Gospels and, by the sheer force of his papal authority, declares they are all the same person. He took the anointing from Mary of Bethany, the tears of repentance from the unnamed sinner in Luke 7, and the famous name of Mary of Magdala, and he forged them together. He created a new, composite character, a powerful and simple narrative for an illiterate age, the repentant prostitute. Why? The motive was twofold. First, it created the ultimate, simple symbol of sin and redemption, a powerful teaching tool. But second, and far more strategically, it solved the problem of Mary Magdalene, the powerful, wealthy, female apostolia figure who stood as a precedent for female leadership was gone. In her place was a broken, sexualized sinner, whose authority came not from her own strength or apostleship, but only from the forgiveness she received from the male leaders of the Church. The character assassination was complete. They couldn't remove her from the Bible, so they buried her true identity under a mountain of shame. And by doing so, they created the perfect justification to later ignore her final years, her death, and her true, inconvenient legacy. The silence about her end began with the total distortion of her life. The official story of the apostles ends in blood and glory. Tradition tells us Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. Paul was beheaded outside the city walls. The Church carefully preserved and celebrated the final, violent testimonies of its male founders. But for the most important female founder, the apostle to the apostles, the official record offers only a void. The Church chose to celebrate her shame, but not her courage. To find the rest of her story, we must now follow the whispers that Rome tried to silence. The Church's official story of the male apostles ends in blood and glory. Tradition tells us Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. Paul was beheaded outside the city walls. Andrew was crucified in Greece. Thomas martyred in India. The Church carefully preserved and celebrated the final, violent testimonies of its male founders. But for the most important female founder, the Apostle to the Apostles, the official record offers only a void. After delivering her message of the resurrection, Mary Magdalene vanishes from the pages of the New Testament. No official account of her later years, her ministry, or her death was ever preserved by Rome. It is a silence so profound, so absolute, it begs the question, was she forgotten or was she deliberately ignored? History, however, abhors a vacuum. Where the official record falls silent, other, older voices begin to speak. To hear them, we must turn our gaze from Rome, the center of the new empire, to its wilder, western shores. To the region of Provence in southern France, where an ancient and powerful tradition has been preserved for nearly 2,000 years, a tradition that claims to tell the rest of Mary Magdalene's story. According to this tradition, which survives in texts like the 13th century Golden Legend, but has roots stretching back to the earliest centuries of Christianity, the story begins in the furnace of persecution. In the years following Jesus' ascension, the Christian community in Jerusalem became a target. Stephen, the first martyr, was stoned to death. James, the brother of John, was executed by the sword. To silence the movement's most powerful witnesses, a group of Jesus' closest companions was arrested. Among them, the tradition names Mary Magdalene, her sister Martha, her brother Lazarus, Mary Salome, and Mary Jacobi. Not wanting to create more martyrs and stir up the populace with public executions, the authorities chose a crueler, quieter fate. They placed the disciples in a rudderless, oarless, sailless boat and cast them adrift into the vastness of the Mediterranean Sea. It was a death sentence by exposure and starvation, an attempt to erase them from history without a trace. The story is meant to sound miraculous, a testament to divine providence, and perhaps it was, but it's also grounded in a harsh historical reality. Exile by sea was a known Roman punishment for political undesirables, and the very currents of the Mediterranean flow in a predictable, westward pattern. A drifting boat launched from the coast of Judea would, if it survived the storms, inevitably find its way towards the southern shores of what was then Roman Gaul. Furthermore, Provence was not some unknown barbarian land. It was a thriving, long-established Roman province. The port of Massilia, modern-day Marseille, had been founded by the Greeks 600 years earlier and was a bustling hub of commerce. Established sea routes connected it directly with every major port in the east, including Caesarea in Judea. It is historically certain that refugees from Judea, whether cast adrift or paying for passage on merchant ships, could and did make this journey. It was a logical destination. The tradition tells us that against all odds, their boat came to rest on the coast of the Camargue, at a place now known as Saintes Maries de la Mer, the Saint Marys of the Sea, named in honor of their miraculous arrival. To this day, the town is a major pilgrimage site. Every year in May, the Romani people of Europe gather there to celebrate their patron saint, Saint Sara Hor Sara la Kali, Sara the Black, who, according to their ancient tradition, was the servant who accompanied the Marys and cared for them on their journey. This is not just a story in a book. It is a living, breathing tradition, celebrated with passion and devotion for over 1,000 years. From this landing point, the tradition says the disciples dispersed to bring their message to the people of Gaul. But Mary Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles, chose a different path. She did not seek to build a new church or lead a new community. She sought solitude. The erasure of her legacy was not complete, it was simply transformed. The tradition tells us that while Lazarus engaged in the public ministry of a bishop in Marseille, and Martha became the heroine of Tarascon, Mary Magdalene chose a radically different path. She was not seeking a congregation to lead or a city to convert. She had witnessed the ultimate mystery, the resurrection, and now she sought not to explain it, but to absorb it, to live within its profound truth. Her journey took her inland, away from the coastal towns, deep into the wild, rugged landscape of the Sainte-Baume Massif, a place of deep forests, soaring limestone cliffs, and a silence so profound it feels eternal. It was here, according to the ancient tradition, that she found her final home, not a palace, not a church, but a cave, a damp, cold grotto, nestled high on a cliff face, a natural sanctuary open to the wind and the sky. This place, known today as the Grotto of Sainte-Baume, is where tradition says Mary Magdalene spent the final 30 years of her life. The choice of a grotto is deeply symbolic in spiritual history. It is the womb of the earth, a place of death to the outside world and rebirth into a deeper reality. For Mary Magdalene, who had stood before the ultimate sacred cavité empty tomba grotto, would have been the perfect, final sanctuary to contemplate the mystery of death and rebirth she had witnessed firsthand. The legend describes her life here as one of extreme simplicity, a radical asceticism. She lived in solitude, in prayer, in a state of profound, constant communion with the divine. The more mystical versions of the tradition, recorded in the Golden Legend, say that she was fed not by earthly food, but by celestial manna, and that 7 times a day, angels would descend and lift her to the mountain peak to hear the choirs of heaven. These images convey a deep theological truth. They describe a life so completely dedicated to the spiritual realm that the needs of the physical world simply fell away. Her story, which began with a complete healing from total affliction, was now reaching its complete spiritual fulfillment. This was a different kind of apostleship. Her authority came not from an office or a title, but from a direct, unmediated, and continuous experience of the divine. And her death, according to the tradition, was as quiet and profound as her final years of life. After 30 years in the grotto, she was miraculously guided down from the mountain to the small oratory in the valley below, where Saint Maximin was celebrating the liturgy. There, surrounded by a celestial light and a heavenly fragrance, she received her final communion, and then, peacefully, her long exile over, she died. There was no crowd, no public spectacle, no glorious, violent martyrdom. And this, precisely, is why it was so dangerous to the developing narrative of the Church. A religion built on the glory of martyrdom needs martyrs. A church building a worldly power structure needs stories of conflict, victory, and public sacrifice. Mary Magdalene's death was the opposite. It suggests a different, quieter path to holiness that doesn't require the validation of a public execution or the authority of an institutional office. This narrative validated a form of spiritual authority, personal, mystical, contemplative, and embodied by a woman that existed entirely outside the hierarchical, male-dominated structure the Roman Church was meticulously building. So, while the deaths of the male apostles were enshrined in liturgy and legend, the death of the apostle to the apostles was allowed to fade into the obscurity of local French folklore. The silence was not an accident. It was a choice. Her tragic end was not that she died, but that her powerful, peaceful, and alternative story was buried. So, we have reached the end of this journey, a journey through censored history, silenced voices, and a truth that refused to be forgotten. We began with a simple, haunting question. Why did the most important woman in early Christianity simply vanish from the story? We discovered that her disappearance from the record began with the assassination of her character. We saw how the powerful public apostle was deliberately transformed into a repentant sinner by Pope Gregory the Great, a strategic move to neutralize a model of female leadership that threatened a rising patriarchal order. We then followed the ancient, whispered traditions to the shores of France, finding a story of exile, not of glory, a story so persistent and unique it rings with the echo of authentic memory. And finally, we journeyed to the Grotto of Sainte-Baume, to the heart of her 30 years of silent contemplation, and witnessed a peaceful death, a narrative of quiet, mystical faith so powerful in its subtlety that it, too, had to be suppressed in favor of the more dramatic, public martyrdoms of the male apostles. The tragedy of Mary Magdalene's end, we can now see, was not in how she died. It was in how her memory was treated. The true tragedy was not the death of her body, but the calculated martyrdom of her legacy. But what does recovering this story mean for us today? Is this an attack on faith, or is it an invitation to deepen it? To recognize Mary Magdalene's full story is not to weaken Christianity, but to enrich it. It restores a powerful, foundational model of female spiritual leadership to the very heart of the faith. It reminds us that there are many paths to holiness, not just the public path of the preacher or the martyr, but the quiet, contemplative path of the mystic. Her story validates the inner journey, the direct experience of the divine that transcends all institutions. Her story is a testament to all those whose voices have been marginalized, whose experiences have been deemed inconvenient by official narratives. It teaches us that truth has a persistent, inexorable quality. It cannot be permanently buried. It may take centuries, it may require the tireless work of countless seekers, but it will always, eventually, find its way back to the light. This journey of discovery does not end here. This is just the beginning. If this investigation has touched you, if it has awakened something in your spirit, we want to hear from you. Leave your prayer request in the comments. This is a community of seekers, and we are here to support one another. If you believe these hidden stories deserve to be told, your engagement is crucial. Like this video to show that this truth matters. Share it with someone who is also asking questions. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because the secrets we plan to unveil next go even deeper. Mary Magdalene's true legacy is not in relics or pilgrimage sites, however sacred they may be. It is in the inspiration she offers to all of us who seek truth, who refuse to accept incomplete narratives, and who insist on hearing the voices that were silenced. The truth was not lost, it was simply hidden. And now, it is being brought back into the light.